that you can tell your children that we had it really, really rough in our school and college education. We used to have to choose certain subjects. We had to choose a certain stream. And once you chose to be an engineer or a doctor, you could never, ever, ever change from that. Or changing from that used to be really, really difficult because you had to go back and do everything again. So you can also tell them that we were in the ancient age of the internet, where you are interacting with me right now, but I can't see you at all. So what I am hoping for is that you will have a lot of questions for me, even in the middle of the 50-minute talk. Again, 50 minutes is something that is a little bit antiquated, I would say. In the age of the internet, I do not know any YouTuber who puts out a 50-minute YouTube, whether they're doing a whole thing or whether they're showing their interiors or whether they're doing a conversation about makeup or about books or whatever. I do not know of anybody who talks for 50 minutes nonstop anymore in this day and age. So please feel free to interrupt me. I shall be very happy to be interrupted in this monologue as such. Let's not make it a monologue as far as possible. Now, coming to the national education policy, ideally, actually, I would love to hear from one of you, any one of you, what the meaning of the word policy is to you, since all of you are law students. There is a chat window with the Q&A written on it. But I would love to hear what you think the word policy means. I know you've been taught a lot of things. I have read tons of things in the newspapers, and I'm absolutely convinced that the word policy is the most misused and misunderstood term in India today. Barring one, governance. Governance is used even worse than the word policy is. Prerna, could I ask you if we are recording this session?
Yes, ma'am, we're recording.
Fantastic, fantastic. So before I start talking about this new education policy 2020, I actually want to tell you the story of the new education policy. Work on this policy has been going on for, when did the last policy happen? 34 years ago, which meant the whole world was a completely different place. We didn't have the internet, for example. There was absolutely no technology. You were unable to access knowledge unless your teachers taught it to you. Everything came via big fat textbooks. You had to sit down and memorize things, and the more you memorized, the smarter you were. Now that world changed dramatically. In between the previous policy and this one, we've even had India becoming the savior of the world when the Y2K crisis happened. I don't know if many of you know of that, but India equals internet, India equals IT happened when the Y2K crisis happened. Look it up. All of you have, and don't look it up right now. But it was a fairly dramatic story if we Indians tell the story. And from then to the journey to becoming code coolies to the rest of the world and not owning the design or the value added space, and then renewing ourselves is, for me personally, the pain point in advocating very adamantly, I would say, for a new education policy. Another thing that happens in policy making, I don't know how many of you have who are listening to this or listening to the recording later on. I don't know how many of you have actually, thank goodness, Utkarsh Tripathi, you know what the word policy means. So when you generate a policy, you tend to have a whole bunch of consultations. When you have a bunch of consultations, what has happened traditionally is that everybody consults with experts, which sounds logical, right? These are the people who will be able to input into the strategy. And I can understand consulting with experts when you're talking rocket science. I can understand only consulting with experts when you're talking about building a nuclear reactor. But when it comes to something like education, consulting only with experts means, unfortunately, and that is a reality, not necessarily the ideal situation, it means that you leave the practitioners out. The village teacher is often not consulted at all. The students are almost never consulted in formulation of policy. And I hope that the roar of opinions on education policy actually emerges from institutions such as yours. And so this is the most wonderful thing that happened in this policy was not just the sheer layers of work that went into building the foundations of the policy, but also the fact that this policy's consultations were democratized. And democratizing for me means including everybody in the conversation in a structured manner, which meant that in this case, once it was decided that the policy uh, uh, would be discussed and tabled in front of the government. Please note, I'm not saying parliament because that hasn't happened yet. And there is a discussion to be had over there, especially for students such as you. But every village panchayat, every gram panchayat, every district education officer, everyone who was part of at least the public school system, and many who were part of the private school system, many who were part of the civil society and NGO system were consulted. And this process started in, as far as I remember, 2013 or 2014. And this entire process took 6 months. Now, was it a useful process? I would say no. Was it a necessary process? Absolutely, yes. Was it something that should be repeated and replicated? I pray so, yes, yes. So, why was it not necessarily a useful process? I'll tell you why. Because it's the first time that teachers, many teachers who had never ever thought beyond their classrooms, were asked to think, were asked to reframe their world, were asked to think not just of their students in their own context, but were also asked to think about students outside their context. And for that, they did not have the language. And this is something that is seen consistently across rural schools and urban schools. I've been to conferences where we've had panel discussions about education policy, and the teachers honestly can talk about their context and no other. Policy, of course, always talks about both the wider context and the multiplicity of contexts within the country, actually. So in that sense, education policy is ridiculously chaotic, and the first consultation ever had to be a bit of a failure. But that is every reason. In fact, it is an argument to continue this process to consult at the grassroots, so that the grassroots begins to, and it already has between 2014 and now. If you look at the level of discourse in the policy space, it has matured dramatically. The number of people who have wonderful and meaningful contributions to make to policy are absolutely many more. In fact, as we speak, there is a budget private schools conference and consultation going on, which I think is being broadcast on YouTube at least. It used to be a small clique of tiny private school players, and now you have people who actually didn't understand the larger space, who have worked their way through the larger context and are able to contribute, which is essential. Why is it essential? If you don't understand what's happening in the village classroom, if you do not understand what's happening in the slum classroom, if you do not understand what is happening in the well-resourced classroom, you have no idea what you are creating a guideline for. The information flow needs to go both ways. And the information flow did not happen till this particular policy happened. We also had another dramatic thing that happened for the first time, and that was the availability of the internet and technology. And the availability of the internet and technology meant that we could have mass consultations. So YouGov.in. They asked for mass consultations. Within a day, I think they got 2 lakh suggestions. That is genuine public participation. Like the government, hate the government, like one political party, hate the one political party, completely irrelevant to this process. We are not talking politics today at all. We are simply talking about a process that allows an open platform for every citizen to engage in something that matters to them, in something that creates uh, an engagement with them or their children or their nieces, nephews, neighbors, children every day. So this is absolutely uh, one of the things that has been transformative in this new education policy. Much of what they got right is because they actually went out and asked. It's as simple as that. The more you ask, the more you know. And it's an experts in education. I'm sorry, none of us can ever call ourselves experts. Nobody is actually an expert in education. You may be an expert in a certain pedagogy, you may be an expert in a certain way of running schools, you may be an expert in a very small stream, but complete expertise at the level at which is required by policy pretty much cannot exist. By definition, it cannot exist. I mean, almost, unless, I mean, you're one of those highly evolved alpha wave beasts, something like that. I'm joking. Um, so this is why I think that the entire consultation to committee process that is normal in policy making, I think was created a precedent of consultation at scale that has never happened before. And that is why that is one thing that as law students is going to be super critical, I think, when you are when you are asked to work on new policy formulation. When many of you will work in the public policy space, know it or not, sometimes just drafting the laws, sometimes cross-checking the regulations. Sometimes the boss is going to say, we are going to ask for XYZ in the sugar industry. This is a policy change that we want in the GST for sugar. Should the language be like this or should the language be like that? How do you know what to phrase it as? The entire policy process plays out for you as law students, often in drafting, for example. And that's a prime example. Many of you are going to have much wider roles. I'm going to pause here now. So having told the first part of the story, the rest of it is fairly obvious. It went to committee. The first committee was not very good. All of that work was completely scrapped. It went through draft after draft. The Kasturi Rangan committee came in. We had wonderful people like Manjul Bhargav, etc., on the committee. And finally, they were able to collate. I use the word with care, collate. A lot of what most people said. They were able to work through what they knew and understood. And they were able to come up with a document that seems to have made at least half the world happy. Again, regardless of politics, at least half the world is happy with this now. So that is the story of how the NEP came into being. The mass consultations, the filter process of the consultations, the curation of the consultations, and then moving on to expert consultations that were bound to look at the mass consultations as well. And so the widening of the funnel into policy is one of the first mega things to celebrate about this specific new education policy. I'm going to pause and take a question. I'm going to keep on pausing and taking questions because this I'm sort of flying blind over here in this one. So Ankita, thank you very much. You've asked this question. The NEP allows foreign universities to set up branches in India. Do you think it's a positive development, or will it further privatize education in an exclusionary way? Tell me, which foreign universities are dying to come to India, if they are, because we've invited them before over the years. Of course, we do want foreign universities to play in India and bring what we used to call technical assistance in other fields. We want them to bring their methodology, we want to bring their rigor, we want to bring their quality, we want to bring their ease with accessing the globalized world. But are they willing to come? Because we only want the top 100. And the top 100 so far have said, maybe not. 300 to 400, 400 to 500 rank, well, they're happy to come. And we are turning around and saying, maybe not. So the question in a way is, moot, because even if we allow foreign universities to set up branches in India, and we don't even know what the word branches means yet. That is for the scheme designers to actually clarify what the word branches mean. And it is up to us as advocates to step up to them and say, this is what you should have here and this is what you should not have here. Uh, so that hasn't been defined yet. So would it further privatize education? Honestly, not necessarily. And why would it bother you if it does? Would it bother you? In an exclusionary way, you say. Do you think that it is going to be allowed to be designed in an exclusionary way? And if we allow the design of new entrants to exclude the best of our students who deserve higher education, then I'm sorry, we have designed the scheme wrong. The people who were in charge of writing the scheme saying these are the branches that are allowed and these are the rules you have to maintain and these are the conditions that you have to sign up to, you set rubbish conditionalities if you allowed them to come in and create a unit that would exclude some students just because they happen to be poor, or just because they couldn't pay their fees, or just because they didn't speak in a specific accent, or whatever discrimination that you can see. So I think that's a design issue. And as the first questioner, Utkarsh Tripathi, actually said really well, that it's a set of directions. It's a set of deliberated suggestions. So these suggestions obviously have to now translate into a scheme or a plan or an action path or a roadmap, and ultimately into a contract with these agencies. So it would be foolish of us to create contracts in which we give away the power. Hopefully, we will learn the lessons of bringing the British into India and contracting with them in ways that were less than fair, or create situations where less than fair contracts would have to be enabled. So that I hope that answers your question, Ankita. It was a wide response, not a very focused response. My focused response is yes, it will be exclusionary if we are stupid in writing out the design document. So that, and I use the word stupid with a great deal of anger, because it has been known to happen that we have been less than careful in the past. So that is one. Now to come to the actual national education policy. Shall we talk for a little bit about the hits and the misses? What went well in the policy? Well, some things were hits, of course, but I am just disappointed that they came so late. I mean, now you are, it's at this stage that you're talking about creating a fund for girl education. Yes, there will be a fund for enabling girl education. Clap, clap, clap. Wonderful. Could we have done this 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Should we have done this a long time ago? Absolutely, yes. You're creating a fund for girl education when the girl to boy ratio is already improving dramatically. So secondly, of course, you haven't even asked for a specific amount. But it's already improving dramatically, where you already have so much proof over the years, that if you fund girls' education and you pull girls up through at least through to higher education, your economic development is dramatically improved. Your health outcomes are dramatically improved. We know all of that now. So is this too little, too late, even in the wonderful news? Sure it is. Sure it is. But thank goodness it's come. I mean, finally. So many other things. The rationalization of the teacher training system. A disaster in limbo for the longest time. Teacher training schools were frozen in time for at least 5-7 years. Now, those of you who love your legal research, you know the Supreme Court judgment that held teacher training in a state of limbo. You couldn't do much with it. You had the TET exam, which was like teacher entrance exams, and the NET exams that teachers used to take. The pass rates for that were 11 to 13% in the first few years. So I mean, there was everything that was wrong with teacher education, and that sort of a reform, when things are so bad, shouldn't need to wait for a policy document. You should be fixing those things operationally as it's happening. I mean, I'm not even convinced that this is a policy level structural intervention that was required, when it is really an operational intervention that should have been improving things on an everyday basis, so that when the policy intervention comes, it comes to enable the transformation into the new world, into the new normal, into the next century, or in the next 30 years or whatever. Right now, the policy is being forced to to completely engage at the operational level and fix things that should have been right all along. So that's one aspect, and there are quite a few of these in the policy. In fact, one of the most wonderful things about this policy is that it says everything about everything and uses all the right words. The policy has fantastic coverage, very comprehensive. So many of the things are and people have turned around and said, how will you implement this? How does this make sense in the classroom? And I will refute that as well in a bit. But the three big hits, I think, the three big wonderful things that have happened in this policy. One, the opportunity for people to roll off the higher education degrees and come back in, which means the banking of modular learning and the banking of your credits. Combine that with your the credits that you can transfer across institutions. You can actually have you have a chance as a student to turn around and say, I want to do this. Oh no, I figured out I'm not that good at this. I'm glad I tried this for a while, but this is really not going to work for my personal ikigai, or it's not going to work for my personal engagement with life and career and whatever. So you have this opportunity to experiment. You have the opportunity to make mistakes, make bad choices, and then or work through your way through good choices, or and shift your focus. You have a terrible year, unfortunately, life intervenes. Every one of us has years where we really cannot cope with work. Some people would have an ill parent. Somebody would need to step out to work for a year or two. It's wonderful that they will be given the opportunity to come back and not have to rework through this. I think that's one of the most fundamental changes over here, reflecting the element of choice in the new education policy. Also, not being constrained at the school level, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, in the concept of streams. Absolutely wonderful policy, giving them choice. The third one that I have praised a lot is your ability to take the class 10, 12 board exams multiple times. But honestly, if you look at it, once you start parsing it, you will find that the policy, in a way, hasn't done anything dramatically different. You already had the main exam. You already were entitled to a compartment exam. They should have done a lot more. They should have done a lot more. There should have been a lot more in terms of cross-board entitlement. If you want to take an exam in the Tamil Nadu board, you do. CBSE, you do. Up to you. The choice element should have been far stronger. And it's just not, according to me, it's not good enough. That's my personal view on this one. I'm going to take another question now. Thanks, Pranay, for this. What's your take on homeschooling, and how does this policy address that? Homeschooling, as far as I can see, is not enabled in the policy at all. And for those of us who are sticklers for the law, as most of us should be, while the right to education remains as an act and is not modified, it says the very name of the act is the right to free and compulsory education, which means you are surprised, they call it a right, but you are compelled to attend a school. You are compelled to sign up in a school. So does it actually allow homeschooling at all? I am not sure. Homeschooling does happen in India, thankfully. I am personally very pro homeschooling for a lot of things. The only place where I see homeschooling mentioned in the policy properly is when they talk about disabled students and say, oh, yes, there should be some provision for poor disabled people who are not able to attend school. I'm sorry, homeschooling is not only for the disabled. And enabling somebody who is unable to attend school and uh, doing that as a special favor to them. Homeschooling is not a favor. Homeschooling is an entire pedagogy. So I think it has been seriously underserved. Homeschooling has been underserved. There should have been a lot more on homeschooling. We should have had a homeschooling association. We should have had homeschooling assessments that are formal and under various boards. You could even have a special homeschooling board if you wanted to. There's a lot more you can do. Homeschooling, in fact, in many cases is an act of privilege, where you say that you do not want necessarily need to be educated with the others and with the masses. So in many places, it's an act of privilege. In many places, it's an act of choice. In many places, homeschooling is simply saying, I do not fit into the boxes that schools provide, and I need to create my own space for a while. So I would have loved to see a lot more on proper homeschooling. Very little there. Another question here. Ma'am, you spoke about how consultations, it's very sweet that all of you call me ma'am. I love my age. You spoke about how consultations were conducted with even teachers in villages, and they were spoken to. How do you see the policy addressing teachers, since teachers and students are equally important stakeholders? The various duties imposed on teachers outside of their teaching role, election duty, etc. That has been scrapped in the policy, by the way. Teachers are expected only to teach anymore. In fact, the policy is quite prescriptive in its language over here. It says that teachers should now be asked to only teach. Teachers are not to be asked to do anything other than their teacher role. Very, very explicit in the policy. So it does address that, and it does bring the focus back onto teachers in the role of the forefront of education. I would say. What it does not, there's a lot on the teacher training, etc., which you're saying is obvious, prescribing standards, training, etc. Many people are saying it could have been far more prescriptive or far more illustrative in helping people understand how teachers are going to be trained and how they are going to be trained for all the wonderful things that have been said, say, about middle school. Middle school talks about exploratory learning, critical thinking, discovery learning. It talks about having a fun project to do, 10 days that you sit with your local tradesman somewhere in your area and you learn how to do that. So, you know what's happening there when it comes to teachers? I don't know how many of you remember, but it would have been when you were at school. We had this wonderful, I will call it experiment, called the CCE. And most teachers, we surveyed about 800 schools in depth. We spent about 2 years with them and tried to figure out why the CCE was not working. The CCE was a disaster in its implementation. I mean, such a good idea. Everybody doesn't have to be good at studies, right? Somebody is good at being helpful in the class. There should be credit for that. Somebody is really good at trying very hard. Many countries give equal marks or equal weightage to effort and achievement. So if you could be an A in effort, even if you're a C in achievement. And that is to your credit, that even if you don't really get it, suppose you have some sort of a learning disability, however minor, and you don't get certain specific aspects of calculus, but you're really trying hard, I think it deserves to be rewarded. If you really know something well and you're helping other people achieve that, that's great. If you're a great sports person, if you demonstrate any of the 21st century skills that these people they love, critical thinking, communication, etc., you should get credit for that. So CCE was a disaster at that time. It's come back sneakily, and I'll tell you how later. But why was it a disaster then? This is specifically to your teacher training question. It was a disaster then because teachers had absolutely no idea what to do with the freedom they had to say you can design your own report cards. If it wasn't utilitarian, if it wasn't something that said 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then you could put a tick mark to it, and then you could add up your marks, 1 mark here, 2 marks here, 3 marks, 5 marks, or 10 on 10, 9 on 10. They didn't know what to do with it. Similar challenges are going to happen here because we have now advocated for this wonderful holistic education. But there isn't enough in the policy And that's why people are saying, "Sheh, it's never going to happen." Sure, it's never going to happen if we don't put in the work now to make it happen. And then we'll be bound again in the same ratatota system, which nobody wants. Uh, but teacher training isn't really illustrative enough. Nobody wants a prescriptive policy, but it's not illustrative enough to be able to help teachers cope with this. So now we will have to actually create a teachers help teachers kind of thing, because I've been running webinars on the new education policy ever since it was out. I mean, quite a few a day, and I was on this wonderful panel with some progressive schools. Progressive is code word for rich schools, and the principals and the heads of those schools. They've been running those schools for years, decades. They said, but there's nothing new in that. We've been running these classes. Experiential learning is fine for us. Discovery learning is great. We have been assessing people on their teaming skills and on their soft skills, etc., for the longest time. Oh, sorry, you were the rich schools and you were able to do it. And you were able to afford the 2.5 lakh training that poor schools or government schools have not been able to access. So the challenge in teacher training is not going to be creating institutions, which is already written up in the policy. The challenge in teacher training is not going to be whether they are put on corona duty, as you say, or on election duty, because that's been taken out. The challenge in teacher training is to enable them to grow out of their command and control and the reductionist Marx point of view, and to open their minds to and reduce their fears. I mean, teachers shout because they're afraid. They're bossy because they're afraid in the classroom. Honestly, I mean, they're afraid of losing control of the classroom. And we as students haven't helped them over the years. Let's be honest. We haven't been that great in reducing their fears. As a group of 40 or 50 in a classroom, how many of us have said, hang on, here's a person who's coming up there to help us progress in life. Let's make it easy for our teachers. Let's give them a safe space to work where they can do their best for our growth. No, the teachers have had to earn that. And we use the word discipline, we use the word respect, but really it's about creating safe working spaces for teachers as well. So if that is the transformation that we will have to now create for teachers, so they can actually give us the freedom, or the next students the freedom to teach and learn. So that is a massive answer to what was actually a fairly simple and wonderful question. Thank you for that question. While I wait for more questions, I'm going to go back to the talk part of it. So we talked about the hits, right? Two types of hits. When I say hits, it's like a hit movie. It's a wonderful thing. A hit is a positive thing in my book. There were two types of hits that we talked about. One, the ones that should have happened a long, long time ago and were terribly overdue. Give you a couple of examples. And the second types of hits, hit was the wonderful thing that happened. Let's call it 3M. We have multidisciplinarity. We have modular higher education, both of these in higher education. We have multiple choices for streams in class 9, 10, 11, 12. And we have multiple chances to take the board exams. So all of these are wonderful things. All of them give a lot of freedom. There are other wonderful things like including early years curriculum, year 1 and 2, get combined with early years, because everybody knows class 1 and 2 is simply about socialization. It's mainly about socialization. Of course, it is about setting up the foundations of learning as well, but much of it is about telling children who come from homes, and every home has its own culture, its own ethos, its own way of giving, taking, sharing, teaming, or being individualistic. It's about, so year 1 and 2 is about combining the students and teaching them how to work with each other. And that's practically always been the case in the classroom. So their teachers are now going to get support for that, and the pressure to do your 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, R, E, D, RED, CAT, CAT, BAT, BAT, etc., gets taken away. They will be able to progress the content in more, they'll call it fun ways. Thank goodness they've started using the word fun, but in also more constructive ways, that gives students a safe space to learn and actually progress the, the case. So those were the wins, and there are other wins as well. Now to come to the things that they missed out. Things that they missed out and things that disappoint me a lot. Well, the words are all there. They're just not good enough, or just one or two sentences. Technology. They have said that there's going to be a technology forum that will happen. Well, that was spoken about 2.5 years ago. Come the COVID crisis, come the pandemic, and we still didn't have a education technology policy for the country. The only thing that we came up with was some AICTE approved courses on AI and VR. That's not what education and technology need to be achieving. We should have known how many schools had devices, how many don't. Where do we have access to online learning? Where do we not? Is online learning going to work in specific contexts in India? Because we know the data for online learning and their learning outcomes is not very good globally. Have we found any ways of making it work in India? As a nation, Y2K showed it to us in 99. As a nation, we're actually very good at adapting to technology, to new technology. I mean, our grandmothers are on WhatsApp all the time. Uh, and buying and selling sarees or whatever they want to do. And there was a beautiful advertisement on that. So this technology integration into education, which is very different from edtech drama, by the way. Byju's getting a 10 billion valuation is edtech. You have Pearson that is doing that's English exams and it's doing its IIT coaching and whatever other coaching it's trying to do. That's edtech. Those are products. I'm not even talking about that. The private sector will do what they need to do to access students using technology. I'm talking about actually, I mean, most of you would have seen a video being played in your classroom. It really wasn't always meaningful. Virtual reality is here today. It just gets a word in the new education policy. You don't have how you don't have anything that connects learning and technology. And very few people understand that, of course. We don't even have the cadre of people. I can name just 5 people in the country who genuinely understand how technology and pedagogy should mesh together, or what the concept of digital pedagogy is. Blended learning was a new term for them in 2014. I mean, they didn't even know what blended learning was. Hybrid learning and blended learning has been around for 20 years before that. Where you do a bit of your learning online and you do a bit of it with a teacher presence. Teacher presence continues to be important. So technology was one big gap over there. I'm going to talk about more gaps in the policy, but I'm going to take Utkarsh's question as well. Utkarsh, you asked how difficult is, I think I missed a question in between. I'll come back to that in a bit. But Utkarsh's question, since I've called it out. How difficult is the task of critiquing such policies when the citizens rely on massive misinformation, as is evident from the fact that vocational training was linked to child labor? Seriously, Utkarsh, what a disaster! What a disaster. I mean, who says that just because I know how to paint a cupboard? Well, actually, I don't, because if I turn the camera around, it's an embarrassing cupboard. But even then, badly painted, it's better than the stupid Godrej gray color. But just because a child will learn how to use their hands, they will be forced into child labor. That's a serious leap of logic. And I say that as not as a supporter of any government. I say that not as a supporter of vocational learning, but I think every human being should know how to do at least one thing with their hands. And if we have time one day, I will tell a beautiful story about it. Actually, might as well take a minute and tell it very quickly. In telling it very quickly, I may be telling it very badly. But there's a story of a king who was kidnapped. And these are, these Kashmir to Afghanistan to Iran to all of all the way up to the Balkan countries. These beautiful stories that have traveled with caravans. So it's one of those stories. Now, this king was kidnapped, and let's say he was put out as labor somewhere. And there was no way that to find him again. Nobody knew where he was. And so what he did is he remembered that he had been taught a skill. And the skill that he had been taught was carpet weaving. So using the ability to weave a carpet, he found a way to weave a beautiful carpet with code encoded into that carpet. And he found a way to make sure that that carpet gets sold to his queen, to his wife, who was running the kingdom in his absence. She took a look at the carpet and obviously was able to decode it. Um, it's a story, right? It's just a story, and was able to rescue the king. I love the story for actually talking about how skills are absolutely valid. But during the lockdown, all of us learned that if you can do a bit of plumbing and a bit of electrical work on your own, it's not the end of the world, right? Indians globally are sort of mocked at not being able to work with their hands, and we are charged a little extra for this as well, because basic wiring work is something that everybody does on their own in many countries, where labor is paid a fair wage. Whole other discussion over there. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with knowing something, knowing an extra skill. If you know how to play the piano, it's something that's going to soothe you in later years. If you know how to build a box or a bookshelf, it doesn't mean that you're going to be forced into child labor. It doesn't create a pathway into child labor any more than those pathways and those awful conditions already existed. So is it your question actually, Utkarsh, was how difficult is the task of critiquing such key policies? Of course, it's very difficult. You have to say things in a very, very nice tone. Um, uh, and though I would say that most of us who have good manners would, if a friend of yours had released a movie, or a friend of yours has released a single, not even a friend, an acquaintance, even if you don't like that person, has released a new book, a new single, or a new YouTube video, you're going to hit like on that, aren't you? In the early days, look at all the movie reviews. The first week of movie reviews is always positive, even if it's not a paid review. So, in all honesty, when somebody has put in so much work, even if they get a C for achievement, like I said before, giving them an A for effort really doesn't cost much. But it is complex to critique, I'm going to take one more minute on this. It's complex to critique it because critiquing is seen as criticism, because that's what we've been doing for the longest time. Whereas critiquing should be an act of constructive criticism, as in there's no point criticizing it, or there's no point critiquing it if you're not going to help make it better. So of course, in that sense, with that spirit of honesty, if you approach it, sure it works. Sure it works. I have an article out in the Hindustan Times, which was my first reaction and the first pass read. That sounds more positive. There's another balancing piece out in Bloomberg Quint that says positive things and lists out gaps as well. At the same time, both of them are op-eds. Both of them are the same 600, 700 words. And 700 words is rubbish. You can barely say anything in it. But there is a fair critique over there, and there's been plenty of critique in the press as well. So critiquing policy is also a 21st century skill, because it is about communicating appropriately, not just going blah, but communicating appropriately. This is your entire training as lawyers, to communicate appropriately in order to achieve the ends that you seek. So it's a choice. Next question here that's popped up. It's a choice. And every choice that you get comes with trade-offs. So I'm going to read out the question. With regard to the 4-year bachelor degree, it is very difficult for many people to afford college education for 4 years, and dropping out early may affect their employment opportunities. What is your opinion of the same? One, the 4-year degree seems to be necessary in India, because the 3-year degree is not getting us any employable outcomes. I mean, employability is not the only goal of an education. Completely agree with that. There's a lot more to education, but let's just stick with the part on employability. And because your question is about employability and being able to afford the education, and then what does it get you in terms of the trade-off if you step out and when you finish it. The 3-year degree is not creating employable people. They're just not useful enough. They don't know enough to be able to join an office and actually contribute to an office or any work stream or workplace. The 4-year degree is hopefully going to give them more time to grow up and to learn some things that are useful and usable. So that is the new education policy does not say 4 years are compulsory. It says 3 or 4 years. It gives the choice. Also, if you think you need to opt out at the end of 3 years and not go in for the 4th year, you still can do that. It will just carry a different name. You can always come back and complete your 4th year later. You can do your 4th year with distance education later. So you are enabled with choices. I think much depends upon the quality of your degree and the quality of the work that you put in as a student to be able to actually handle work life. I mean, degrees and certificates, unfortunately, have eroded in value so much that many organizations across the world don't even, they've dropped the concept of hiring by degree. They do it by admission tests. Many of you would have seen the many hoops that you have to jump through in order to get a job. So it is a trade-off. Should I spend so much money right now? And honestly, government public universities are not that expensive in India. Or should I continue to work now? Now, this is a choice that you should be able to make as an adult, because now that anybody in higher education, at least by the second year of higher education, you're technically an adult and independent of everybody else. So hopefully your school would have enabled you to make that decision. And if your school has not enabled you to make that decision, then you really should go and ask for your money back from schools. I'm joking about that because school fees and freedom of school fees is a very, very critical issue, which you haven't asked about, so I'm not talking about it yet. In summary, you need to do a cost-benefit analysis of what the degree will cost you. Can you afford it? Are there any scholarships available for it? Are you able to access any grants? Can you crowdfund money for your course? And what is the reward that you will receive? How much will you earn if you spend that money? So I'm going to wrap up very quickly by talking about one more hit, and this is directly related to the question that I just answered. Sorry, one more miss, directly related to the question that I answered. The policy is, unfortunately, it is not talking about these transitions. How do you transition from school to higher education? How are you enabled in making the choices? Because once you've been given so much freedom that you can do physics and piano and guitar and mathematics at the same time, are you sure you're making the right choices? Because with freedom comes responsibility. With freedom, you need some structure, some decision-making capacity, capability. Somebody's got to teach you how to make that decision so that you make the right choices. Since you're now unlimited with streams, those of us who have gone, let's say, to Europe, not Europe, even America's massive stores, grocery stores, and it's been joked about in lots of movies, etc. also. Well, the minute you go there and you see this entire 1 mile long aisle full of 67, 300 types of cereal, I mean, you look at that and you say, how can I choose? How do I know whether I want a blueberry pop something something or a raspberry bop something something? They all look equally good or they all look equally terrible, and I haven't had experience in trying them before. So making a choice is a critical skill, and those transitions have not been talked about in the NEP at all. The transition from school to college, the transition from school to college to employment, and the transition within employment. I mean, once you start employment, you don't suddenly shut down your training and learning brain and you say, okay, I am perfect for life and nobody is going to ever need to teach me everything ever again. I never need to learn again. Of course, it doesn't happen. You have to train yourself again and again and again and again. The world is changing. Lifelong education is so underserved. The transition from middle management to higher management, all of this is education and completely ignored in the policy. So Um, I will pause my lecture part over here, though we've been talking through the questions, and I'm going to focus more on the questions, and then maybe add a couple of bits from what I had prepared to share with you later on. Question was, very nice of you to thank me for the session. We're still going on. It's not over yet. For the informative session, where do we go from here? In the end, the NEP is just excellent question. In the end, the NEP is just a directive policy document. What the NEP recommends, do you think schools, universities, educators should look for constructively working on? Absolutely. And this is where now I am looking at what we broadly call the PPP model. Because much of this, much of what has been prescribed in the NEP has come from, in the higher education space, the kind of freedom they've given has come from Western universities. I am looking at Indian scholars and Indian students and young Indian faculty, more than senior faculty, young Indian faculty in the Western world who understand both systems to turn around and say, you know, this is how I did this. This is how I implemented this. This is how our state system implemented this. This is how we do it at Harvard. This is the way we do it at UPenn. This is the way we do it at Berkeley. This is the way we do it at the State Agricultural College. This is how it will work for you. And our teachers, unfortunately, or fortunately, are not able to visualize the new education policy and reframe it for their classrooms. So this is where I'm looking at people who've done it before to frame it for them and make it real for them, make it visible to them and make it tangible for them, saying, hang on, don't worry, it's been done like this before. And every teacher will typically respond, of course, it'll work in your classroom, but my classroom is such an exception. Exceptionalism is like the first E of education. My classroom is such an exception that it will not work for me. Sure, it will. It will need to be done your way. You will have to adapt to it. You will have to work for scale, but at least you have a visual of how it worked before in another place. Similarly to the progressive private schools, the ones who said, we've been doing 21st century skills for the longest time, holistic, experiential, discovery learning, all the wonderful things. Critical thinking, we've been teaching it all the time. Oh, activity-based learning, we've been doing it so well. Huh? Thank you very much for being so wonderful at it. Please share. Because till you share, others are not going to be able to figure it out. And it's not much use your knowing what you know and teaching your 5% or 10% of your students if you're not able to enable the other 90% of the country with your teaching skills. So I think that is the sharing, the peer learning networks, as we call it in education, the PLNs of teachers across subjects, across pedagogies, across different ways of working is going to be critical to actually making it happen. Without the sharing of how it worked before, the teachers who've never seen it before are not going to be able to do it on their own. We've seen this with the CCE. They couldn't do it on their own without help. And whatever little help that was coming in the trickle-down structure didn't work for them. So there's a lot more to be done. There are other semi-institutional bits that need to be put into the space, but I will pause here and we can have a more specialized discussion on that another time. The simplest thing to do is enable subject-based peer learning networks, where activity-based learning has been done for history plus chemistry. Make that happen over here. Help others do it better. There's another question here that says, when we're looking at the 8th to 12th grade as having the possibility of doing a variety of subjects from different streams, where do you think we stand in terms of infrastructure to actually realize the aim of this? Oh, what a wonderful question. And you brought me to my pet subject, which is clusters. And that is in the NEP. I'll read the rest of the question. Where do you think we stand in terms of infrastructure to actually realize the aim of this? This in the background of schools across the country offering only 1 to 2 streams. So here's the wonderful thing. You know, this multiple choice of subjects across streams was already allowed by the CBSE. And many schools, rich schools, I am told, were able to offer this. Why were they able to offer this? Because they had the money to offer courses for smaller cohorts. So if you have only 5 people who want to do uh, a specific kind of name a subject for me, physical education. Only 5 people want to do physical education theory, and that's not enough to make up a whole section. Then those schools said, fine, we'll put in that. We will hire a teacher just for these 5 students because they had enough money in fees, right, to be able to do that. Administratively, every school cannot do that. A school with 26 or 27 sections already has the skill to enable many more choices. So physics and economics, if you want to do, sure, we have enough students who want to do that, even if it is across streams. So we can make up a section for you. So what's been happening in the past is schools have been run by administration, administrative convenience. Now, how do you do it in the schools that could not do it before? Yeah, again, share. We are in the 4th month of online teaching. We have learned how to learn and teach without physical infrastructure or physical rooms being booked for a certain teacher to be in a certain room. We know that a lecture doesn't need to be 40 minutes long any time. Asynchronous learning is possible. So do 15-minute, 20-minute lectures more times in the day. Reframe, restructure, just unbundle it, break up all the bits that need to be done and create your own Lego. I'm sorry, my hands look really large when I bring it so close to the camera, so I should speak from a distance. But unbundle it completely and build it in a way that if you want to do economics, but your school doesn't offer it, you should be able to sign up for economics in another school far away where you can learn most of it, and then you can do with some ancillary supportive teaching at your school, which your school can afford. There's no reason for some people to be affiliated only to one school. In the public sector, they're talking about clusters, right? They're talking about government school clusters. The same cluster approach can be seen as a shared services approach or a shared subjects approach. If you do not have enough money to afford a science laboratory for your school, then 5 schools can share one van that is a chemistry lab that travels from one school to another one day of the week. Your cluster approach has not been exploited enough in the NEP. And those of us who take it forward, those of you who will be asked to actually write out the scheme saying, this is how we will take it forward, should be writing out these solutions for schools. The language accent. Thank you, Gayatri Gupta, for asking this question. On the language aspect of the NEP. So honestly speaking, I think both sides are right. Both sides have a valid case in this case. It is true that with the best of intentions and the purest of hearts and with the best of research that is available to us today, please note there is not enough research in the Indian context. We say we have the largest number of students in the world, but we really do not have enough research for it. So all the research comes from, say, Latin American students learning English, multilingual learning. So with that caveat, that the research, which is excellent, is not in the Indian context. Everything says that if you explain something to a child in their home language, or, and I think that's terrible phrasing, bad phrasing causes so much trouble, in their language of play. Which language do the kids play in the playground when they go out for their tiffin or their recess? Whichever language they play in, whichever they understand, whatever the teacher can manage at that point of time as best as they can and not manage alone. Pause that bit, hold on to that bit. The teacher, if they explain it to the student in that language, students actually get it much better rather than sitting and saying, oh, okay, APPLE is apple, apple is seb, apple mane seb. Seb is something that comes from Kashmir and from Uttarakhand, whatever. Right? If you just, instead of spending that time in the early years to do rote learning in English or rote learning to English, you could actually have talked about how you grow an apple, where it grows, why does it grow there, why doesn't it grow somewhere else, what are the vitamins that you get from an apple? Why should you eat it? How many different ways to eat it? What happens when you do this with an apple? What happens when you dip an apple in vinegar for a while? Just so many other things that you could have been doing where actual learning was progressing about the apple in this case. And that was just a random example because A for apple is something that we all seem to have started with. So it, of course, learning is better at this stage in your home language. And of course, everybody, 4% of India is an out-of-state learner. So if they learn the language of play, they, let's say half of them, 3/4 of them will be inconvenienced, they will need other support. But even this, in fact, de facto, that's what happens in classes, right? Teachers open their textbook and they read the sentence and they translate it into a language that most of the students understand. If they're from the Hindi belt, you'll read a sentence out in English from your Radiant reader or whatever it is, and then you'll explain it in Hindi to the class. And that's de facto. That's our classes have been bilingual or multilingual for the longest time. And if you have created a safe learning space, somebody who speaks only Tamil in that classroom will turn to a friend and say, "Hey, I didn't understand that." And somebody else will try to make it happen for them, either then or later. So peer learning and multilingual resources. Suppose that the student can go home and simply click on, say, on the textbook Radiant Reader Chapter 3 and say, translate this for me in Tamil. We have it on every tweet, translate button. Of course, we can do it easily. It's not a big deal, really. We already have many of the textbooks across languages. There's not even the translation work to be done. So if you could enable peer learning and you enable multilingual resources, the challenge of the first few years is mitigated. I will not say eliminated, it is mitigated. More importantly, why did the protest happen? Because I want to explain the other side of it as well. The protest happened because we know that most of us, in honesty, we send our children to school and we force them into certain choices because those choices are going to give them economic viability in life. Become a doctor and an engineer trope has come because we know at least a doctor will be able to feed themselves, right? And feed their family. Become an engineer, you'll get a job somewhere in the world for sure. You will never go hungry. Get into IIT, you will have 5 jobs waiting for you at every opportunity in the worst moments of your life. Even if you don't like the jobs, like or dislike is different, but at least you will not go hungry. You will not reach that desperation in the practical world. What happens to those who have lagged behind in English is that they may or may not be able to get admission to being a doctor or an engineer until you are able to enable the higher education in the local language and further employment. Somebody has learned in the Bengali medium, if they're able to learn to be a doctor in the Bengali medium with adequate resources, excellent resources, and then also have opportunities for employment in that medium, the protest would be much, much less. But by not taking an ecosystem approach and only saying years 1 to 5, this is just something that was uh, bound to create protest. Without an ecosystem approach, the language thing is very half baked over here, and the protests are actually legit. The protests are legit because English is the language of mobility. There are two objectives to education: learning outcomes, which means foundational skills, and B, mobility. In fact, I would say the prime objective of education is you move from one level to another, right? Social and economic mobility. You are sitting here in your lecture right now, and you are going through your law courses right now because you know that this is going to progress you in life. You're going to move from one level to another. Mobility is critical. Mobility was not ensured in the language policy as it was written over there. Without an ecosystem approach, you cannot have that happen. So I think it's something that could have been done better. Could have been done better. So, um, if there are no more questions, Prerna, is it?
Yes.
Yes, hi. If there are no more questions, I can pause here, or I can take up one more topic if you want me to on the NEP. But I think we've done really well on time so far, so let's not mess that up.
Yeah, absolutely. There aren't any more questions, so I mean, if you'd like to go ahead with another topic, I think that'd be nice.
So I'll do this very quickly because I want to talk about the hidden bits in the new education policy, and I'm just going to take one example over here. we've all assessed the new education policy as pros and cons and missing bits. But there is something very sneaky about the new education policy, and I love its sneakiness because anybody in the world hates change. Nobody hates change more than teachers and education establishments. I mean, have you ever tried to go to your school principal and say, please don't do things this way, please do things that way? My goodness, getting schools to change is the toughest thing. And I go there as looking as impressive as I can. And even then, I'm terrified of speaking to school principals because I know they will not budge, or maybe they don't know how to budge, they do not know how to change. And here comes this new education policy, says change this, change that, change this, change that. And all of us know that, not just our schools. The best of teachers know how to change it, by the way. Best of schools know how to change, but most of them don't. All of us know that even if our teachers acknowledge the fact that the old ways are not essential, it's impossible for them, because parents will come and ask, where are the marks? Why is the result not so good? Many experiential schools have tried this out. And parents have come and said, hang on, where are the marks? I don't understand what's happening. You're not teaching my child anything at school. This is nonsense education. They're just having fun and playing at school. I don't pay good money. I want to see marks. So the new education policy has recognized the fact that assessment is the tail that wags the dog. Assessment, marks, and tests are the tail that wags the dog. So what they did is, in very different places, and you sort of have to pick it out from here and there. You have in very different places different things about assessment. In one place, very coolly and calmly, they have said, assessment will now be application based. Suddenly, by changing the nature of the question, if assessment is going to be application based, what difference does it? You're not going to get questions like, which was the year of the Battle of Plassey? If they're going to be application based, you can't have multiple choice questions. You can have multiple choice questions, but each of the answers, just like in the GMAT, etc., and in the SAT exams, will need you to go through a thinking process, not just ratta based. So in one tiny sentence there, they have changed that. Then gently they have put in another little element in another place, saying, we will start a new thing called Parak, and that will come under the National Testing Agency later on. That has a voluntary, again gently placed on that, voluntary exam that could become a school university admission exam. Nobody has to take it. It's not compulsory at all. Now suddenly there is an exam that makes the entire this board versus that board drama completely pointless. Now, see also, so this is one, at the operational level, they tweak the question. Then at the level of structural change, they tweak the exam. Then at the level of institutions, so they create this entire architecture. There's a design or a strategic change. There's an entire strategy over here with proper architecture. They add institutional elements to it. They say the National Testing Agency is going to work to create standards for all the boards. The National Testing Agency, or Parak, which will first be under NCRT and then under an independent agency, will create application-based exams, will create a university exam. Now, if there is a university entrance exam that is acceptable to most universities, if they do it well, then suddenly the entire dynamic between going from schools to universities, based on Tamil Nadu board versus CBSE versus your Rajasthan board, etc., the entire dynamic changes. And I think this is the most incredible and probably the most intelligent part of the new education policy, where gently they have built an entire architecture for change while paying lip service to lots of wonderful things that should happen anyway. This is the real change that will work its way through the system and move us away from the old rote learning culture. I'm actually quite optimistic about this one because most of the elements over there have been laid out already. So with that a little extra bit of insight, I would love you to read the document and weave through it to identify more elements of that infrastructure. There are 3 or 4 institutional elements. There's a little bit more that hopefully will enable the change. and I say hopefully, but really it's done reasonably well, and we have some very good experts in place in the country now. 5 years ago, we didn't have that kind of assessment expertise. Now we do have a lot of assessment expertise in 3 or 4 institutions. So it would be absolutely. Uh, I am going to be optimistic about this. I have decided to be optimistic because for the first time, I have seen a genuine will to change and a pathway, a roadmap to change, both quietly embedded into the new education policy. So I'll stop here, and I want to thank you all for actually asking such wonderful questions and for engaging so very well. Happy to take more questions if there are any. Right.
Yeah, I don't think there are any more
I think
questions.
we've taken care. Yeah, I think we've taken care of most questions as far as I can see.
Yeah, I don't think I have any questions either. Yeah. Uh, I think that should be all for today. Thank you so much for your talk, ma'am. It was a great talk. We got a lot of insight into in terms of formulation and implementation, and a lot of us had certain reservations since this policy is just so massive, like in terms of the changes it's bringing. And thank you so much for the talk. Now, I think we should. I mean, if there aren't any more questions, I think we should go ahead and wrap.
Thank you very much for this. And I hope you have a great time. If you have more questions or more discussions on this, let's do it in a specific manner if you want to, anytime. Take care,
Absolutely.
good luck, and argue well and write well, all of you. Take care. Stay safe.